welcome to the Watchman. Well, Russia is in the Middle East. Folks, this is a massive game changer to see the Russians, a military powerhouse with a massive nuclear arsenal, openly aligning themselves with Islamic terrorists in the form of Hezbollah and Iran on the Syrian battlefields. So why should you care about the Russian bear driving into the Middle East? My CBN News colleague Dale Hurd takes a closer look.
Since the beginning of Russia's military buildup in Syria, world leaders have been wondering what Vladimir Putin is really up to. Yes, Putin wants to rescue his ally, the brutal Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, from losing a bloody civil war. And Russia would like to hang on to its naval facility in the Syrian port of Latakia. But is that all Putin is after? Or does he have other goals as well?
We don't truly understand yet what it is that Russia is going to do in Syria.
What experts do know is that Vladimir Putin could create a lot of trouble in the Middle East. But in the process, he could also boost the ailing Russian economy. An economy that is still in the tank from low oil prices and from Western economic sanctions over Russia's annexation of Crimea. And despite Putin's efforts to diversify the economy, it still lives or dies with energy prices.
The ruble is very sensitive to the moves of oil prices. So if oil becomes cheaper, the ruble does the same.
Putin has taken a big gamble with the public at home by going into Syria. Polls show most Russians opposed sending troops to Syria. But perhaps Putin realizes that by moving into Syria, he can protect his ally Assad and gain the side benefit of rising oil prices, thus boosting the Russian economy and his standing at home. Russia's military buildup and bombing campaign in Syria have revived the so-called security premium, a small rally in oil prices based on the fear of shortages in other parts of the world because of war in the Middle East. A big escalation in fighting could mean a big escalation in oil prices. Russia is also competing with the Saudis for energy customers, and war in the Middle East makes Saudi supplies look less reliable. And with its new airbase in Syria, Russia could coordinate with Iran to disrupt shipments from Persian Gulf and Red Sea terminals. So by unleashing his military in Syria, Vladimir Putin could kill two birds with one stone, both saving an ally and reviving Russia's oil-based economy. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale. You know, folks, I say this Russian drive into the Middle East is a historical game changer for a few major reasons. Number one, once again, Russia remains a military powerhouse. Maybe not to the levels, of course, that it was during the Soviet era, but they are rapidly modernizing and advancing and rebuilding their military as we speak. And number two, Russia obviously has a massive nuclear arsenal. And what that means, and this is why it is so unprecedented, is that Hezbollah, an Islamic terror group with plenty of American blood on its hands, and the Iranian regime, including the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, the Quds Force, folks, they now effectively have a nuclear umbrella in the form of Russia. The Iranians, Hezbollah, have to feel very empowered and emboldened right now. They have the Russian bear behind them, and Russia, again, is in Syria. This is right at Israel's doorstep. And you know, it's interesting, folks. A lot of people are saying that this is prophetic. They're saying that Vladimir Putin, as described in Ezekiel 38 and 39 in the Bible, has had a hook placed in his jaw that has brought him down to the Middle East on the doorstep of the land of Israel. If you look at the book of Ezekiel, chapter 38, chapter 39, we've talked about it before here on the show. It talks about a great confederation, a military confederation coming against Israel in the latter days. It's called the War of Gog and Magog. Funny name, I know, but a lot of prophecy scholars and experts believe that Magog is actually Russia. The Bible talks about a country to the uttermost north of Israel. Look on a map, folks, that's Russia, leading this invasion force, which includes Persia, which is modern-day Iran. Fancy that. And we now have Russia and Iran getting closer and closer, and Russia is now in the Middle East. And folks, they are not going anywhere. They're there to stay. And as Dale said in his story, look, they have their eyes on all of that Middle Eastern oil again. We live in Bible times. But you know, in the short term, Israel has more immediate problems. As I stand here, at least 10 Israelis so far have been killed in what's being called the Palestinian stabbing intifada. And folks, what we're seeing over the past several weeks in Israel, in Jerusalem, in Hebron, and really all around Israel is Palestinians, usually young men, sometimes young women, randomly attacking, or maybe not so randomly, attacking Israelis, women, children, men, with knives usually, sometimes with guns, sometimes with rocks, but the main weapon has been knives, and they've murdered at least 10 Israelis in what are really lone wolf, one man or one woman jihadi attacks, the kind we've talked about here on the show that ISIS wants to carry out here in the West and in Europe. And that's why you should care about what's going on in Israel right now with this stabbing jihad that really shows no sign of letting up. Look, folks, this follows the ISIS blueprint. Think about it. We've talked about it here many times on the show. Low tech, these stabbing attacks, obviously low tech, inexpensive, easy to carry out. One man or one woman can do it. You could stab 5, 6 people, kill them all in one setting. It's not brain surgery. And these are the kind of attacks that first Al-Qaeda a few years ago, and now ISIS has been calling for. They call these attackers city wolves, where you can become that one-man jihad. You can go into a shopping mall in middle America with a knife or a gun, yell Allahu Akbar, and murder several people. So it should be no surprise that ISIS is now openly praising these Palestinian jihadi attacks against Israel, releasing videotapes calling for more stabbings, kill the Jews. This is the message that ISIS is conveying. I call this strategy, these lone wolf, so-called lone wolf, low-tech, inexpensive attacks, part of the jihadist chip away strategy. Here's what I wrote in my 2011 book, The Terrorist Next Door. While lacking the symbolism and history-altering qualities of 9/11, the kind of effect Al-Qaeda craves, these smaller attacks, if carried out steadily, can chip away at a society's confidence and security. There is a growing fear among the U.S. intelligence community that this is precisely the new prototype for Al-Qaeda. Small, grassroots, and inexpensive, with individuals or tiny splinter groups executing attacks. And while Al-Qaeda, or today ISIS, unleashes a series of smaller scale assaults that keeps America off balance, it continues to plot larger, more long-term attacks that would dwarf 9/11. Now, folks, The Terrorist Next Door was released way back in May 2011, before ISIS even existed. But what ISIS has done is they've taken this chip away strategy that Al-Qaeda began, they've taken it and they've gone forward with it in a major way. What ISIS wants to do is essentially turn American and European cities into guerrilla war zones, just like Israel is facing right now, where you have constantly these chip away, lone wolf, solo attacks on a regular basis in American and European cities, causes economic, psychological damage. And folks, let me tell you, the Israelis are much better prepared for it in dealing with it than we are. We are not prepared here in the United States. I hate to say, in middle America, in some of the sleepy cities and towns in our great country, we are really not equipped or prepared to handle that kind of regular onslaught of Islamic terror attacks. Let's face it, folks. And again, this is what ISIS is calling for. Now, a few things to remember here. Can they bring this strategy to fruition here on American soil? Before you say, Stakelbeck, you alarmist, you scaremonger, keep these facts in mind. We've already seen Fort Hood, the Boston bombings, an attack in Chattanooga back in July 2015 where 4 brave U.S. servicemen were killed, an attempted attack in May 2015 in Garland, Texas. And as of October 2015, we've seen at least 60 U.S. citizens arrested on charges of plotting attacks on American soil or trying to join ISIS. Also keep in mind, FBI Director James Comey made a very stunning statement a few months ago. He said that in all 50 U.S. states we have investigations ongoing into ISIS-related activity right here on American soil. So what the FBI Director is saying is that in every state in the Union, we have a network of ISIS supporters and sympathizers. The barbarians are not just at the gates. I've said it many times. They are inside the gates. I'll give you another example. It's not just Stackelbeck saying this. The House Homeland Security Committee right here on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. recently released a report saying that at least 250 U.S. citizens have attempted to join or have joined ISIS. They've left their comfortable homes here in the most prosperous country in the history of the world. They've traveled overseas to Iraq and Syria to join ISIS. And folks, guess what? The House Homeland Security Committee said that dozens of these people have already returned, and there's no way really to keep track of all of them. And the Obama administration really has not come up with a strategy as of yet to stem the flow. Folks, we are in very, very dangerous times. It's going to be okay. Don't get discouraged. Be encouraged, because God sits on the throne. So it will be okay, but you need to know. Would you rather know or not know? I think you need to know, and as followers of Jesus, for such a time as this, we need to be salt and light, and the Bible says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. So now you know. Keep an eye on what's going on with ISIS and this refugee crisis. Keep an eye on Russia and what they're doing at Israel's doorstep. And after the break, we're going to talk more about Israel and more about this ongoing stabbing intifada against Israelis. We're going to talk about the Temple Mount, which has really kind of been the epicenter for this latest conflict, this latest Palestinian jihadist onslaught against Israel. So we're going to take you on the ground to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount, after the break. Stick around. And welcome back. Jerusalem, God's city, mentioned hundreds of times in the Bible in both the Old and New Testaments, never mentioned in the Quran, not even once. Well, right now, Jerusalem is the center of Muslim anger against Israel. The Palestinians and some surrounding Arab nations are saying that Israel is violating the status quo on the Temple Mount. Now, the Temple Mount is the holiest site in Judaism, where Hurd and Solomon's temples once stood, but it's the current home of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, holy shrines of Islam. So what's really going on the Temple Mount? My CBN News colleague Chris Mitchell, CBN's Middle East Bureau Chief, has that story.
It's one of the most holy and contested pieces of real estate on earth, the Temple Mount. For decades, Islamic leaders have incited Muslims to violence by telling them that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is in danger. First, they claim that the Israelis were undermining its foundations to make it collapse. Now they also say it's a threat even for Jews to pray on the sacred plateau.
Extreme movements believe that Israel is planning to build the third temple and to destroy their holy shrine.
Known in Arabic as the Haram al-Sharif, or Noble Sanctuary, it's the place where two consecutive Jewish temples once stood. The second was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. Now, Muslim mosques occupy the site. The Golden Dome of the Rock to my right is the most identifiable Muslim shrine on the Temple Mount. But it's the gray-domed Al-Aqsa Mosque to my left that Muslims consider the third holiest site in Islam. They believe that Muhammad took a famous night ride from Mecca to Al-Aqsa on his winged horse, Al-Barak. Al-Aqsa was first built in 705 AD. In Muslim theology, the site precedes the Jews and goes back to creation.
You know, Adam, when he descended from the heaven, he came here and he was pray here.
No different between Sulaiman and King David and all the prophets is all the same. They're all been in Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Today, the entire plateau is referred to as Al-Aqsa. Nadav Shragai wrote the Al-Aqsa is in danger libel, The History of a Lie. He says when Muslim leaders want to unite the masses, they claim it's in danger.
The match that ignites the people and brings them to the streets and causes violence is this libel. Al-Aqsa is in danger, and this is baseless.
Archaeologist Dr. Gabriel Barkay says there have been excavations near the Temple Mount, but never under it.
One of the cornerstones of Western civilization was never touched by the spade of the archaeologist.
Barkay says it was Muslims, not Jews, who began digging in an attempt to rewrite history.
Since the 90s, there were many destructive diggings going on in the Temple Mount, which were not for archaeological purposes, but the contrary, for destroying archaeological data.
Around 2000, the Islamic religious authorities dug up thousands of years of history with bulldozers from under the Temple Mount to make room for a giant mosque. Barkay headed an operation to save artifacts from the discarded material. Years later, archaeologists and volunteers still sift through the debris. According to Shragai, then Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini started the libel against Israel in the 1930s. He accused the Jews of wanting to collapse the mosques on the Temple Mount. That led to Muslim rioting and murder of the Jews, just the first of many incidents. Islamic expert Dr. Yitzhak Reiter says the tactic hasn't lost its potency.
They really believe in what they think, that Al-Aqsa is in danger as long as Israel is controlling the eastern part of East Jerusalem.
In 1969, the Muslim world blamed Israel for the arson attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque by a visiting Australian Christian. That lie continues today. More trouble in 1996. The worst Israeli-Palestinian violence in 30 years broke out when Israel opened an exit for visitors to the Western Wall tunnels half a mile from Al-Aqsa. And in 2004, rain, snow, and a minor earthquake toppled the entrance ramp to the Temple Mount. That provoked an international Islamic uproar when Israel tried to rebuild it. We asked Muslims in Jerusalem what they think.
It's in danger. To destroy him, to take the place, it's in danger.
They are digging underneath it and digging and digging, and they don't find anything.
God will save it.
Experts say it's important the West takes notice now, because millions of Muslims believe the lie is true. They say if it brought violence in the past, it will do so in the future. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem's Old City.
Well, ISIS, Iran, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, where is this all heading? I discussed it recently at the Act for America conference in Washington, D.C. This is good stuff. Stick around. And welcome back. You know, folks, I speak for a lot of pro-Israel and counter-jihad organizations here in the U.S. One of my favorite organizations, going back many years now, is Act for America. This is a great grassroots organization, really at the forefront of the battle against Islamic jihad and stealth jihad and Islamism right here in the United States. So I was honored to speak for Brigitte Gabriel's group, Act for America, recently here in Washington, D.C. at their annual Washington Summit. Take a look. Al-Qaeda put out a 20-year plan. Where are we on this plan? Well, according to the plan, between 2012 and 2016, the goal was to establish an Islamic caliphate. That's happened. In 2014, ISIS declared a caliphate. Now, it's a pittance compared to the caliphates of old, but still, ISIS controls some 36,000 square miles of territory in the heart of the Middle East. That's an area the size of Great Britain. They've done it in a pretty short amount of time, and folks, that's astounding. That's astounding. Now, the period from 2016 to 2020, according to this Al-Qaeda 20-year plan, from 2016 to 2020, they dubbed this period total confrontation. Total confrontation. Call me crazy, but it seems a lot like we may be heading towards total confrontation between ISIS and the growth of the Islamic State, between Iran on the cusp of a nuclear weapon, with our own leader's assent. Folks, this is a Winston Churchill moment. Churchill in the late 1930s, early 40s, saw the gathering storm of Nazi Germany. He called it for what it was. He was ridiculed. He was castigated and isolated by fellow Western leaders. Today we have one leader, in my view, who sees the rising storm of Islamic jihad. And his name is Benjamin Netanyahu. Coming up, some final thoughts after the break. And welcome back. I know my opening monologue may not have been the most pleasant news, but look, there are steps we can take to counter Vladimir Putin and to counter ISIS influence. Now, I fear that before January 2017, when President Obama leaves office, we're not going to see those steps taken. We should stand up to Vladimir Putin in Syria. Right now, we are giving him free rein there. Number two, with ISIS, the caliphate, this Islamic state they've established over 36,000 square miles of territory in Iraq and Syria, in the heart of the Middle East. That caliphate should be crushed. We can do it. We have the most powerful military in the history of the world. It would not take long. And folks, when you do that, if you crush that caliphate, you demoralize the global jihadist movement and put a dent in the ideology. It would be a good thing. And remember, before 9/11, Al-Qaeda had a safe haven to plot and plan in Afghanistan. Well, then they carried out 9/11. Today, in Iraq, in Syria, ISIS has a safe haven to plot and to plan against the United States. And folks, they have the added benefit of thousands of Western recruits, U.S. citizens, European cities, who can enter this country and move around freely. That is ultimately why we have a stake in crushing, not just defeating, but utterly crushing ISIS. When a great evil rises, ladies and gentlemen, it must be crushed. Think of what we did to the German war machine, the Japanese war machine during World War II. If history shows us anything, it's that when someone tells you they want to kill you, you should believe them. So, take heart, stay strong, stay in prayer. Until next time, thanks for joining us. God bless you, and remember, never hold your peace.